said, the American administration is complex. Sometimes they make decisions that surprise people. Our job is to just sort of hunker down and do the work. I remain confident that we'll get to a much, much better place than we're in today.
If there's a critical task facing Canada's government, it is surely mending our trade relationship with the U.S. But close on the heels of that is the job of uniting the country, doing away with those internal trade barriers and finding a way to get contentious big projects done, especially on the energy file, all while knitting the provinces and the federal government together. You could say all of that is the unwritten mandate of Dominic LeBlanc, who in his long career in public life has held many, many roles, but perhaps none as important as the one he holds now as Minister of International Trade, Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, and the minister responsible for promoting One Canada. Dominic LeBlanc, welcome.
Hi, Amanda. How are you?
Very well. I'm wondering how you're feeling. We have a new Parliament speech from the throne laying the groundwork. There's a lot at stake here. So I wanted to start with how you're feeling about sort of the tasks ahead of you and the pressure that you're facing.
I'm optimistic. We've known each other for a long time. I'm sort of eternally optimistic. But the work that I've been doing over the last number of months, the election campaign, the mandate that Prime Minister Carney got from Canadians, we were very clear what the priorities were. They were reflected in mandate letters that ministers received. So I'm sort of busy at work. I was in Washington. I saw Secretary Lutnick, Ambassador Greer twice, worked with our ambassador to the United States. She's terrific, Kirsten Hillman. So I'm optimistic. We're having what we think are positive discussions with the Americans. There's a fair bit of work in front of us. But it's our sort of principles in terms of the relationship with the United States have been clear. But our principles in terms of building one Canadian economy, which the Prime Minister talked a lot about in the election, are also clear. So I'm trying to do my part of that job and not screw it up.
Well, let's take it in turn here. When it comes to the U.S., I would have said a week ago that it felt like we were moving in a more sane direction, that the UK trade deal gives us some comfort that there's, A, deals to be done, and B, a number that we can settle on. And if it's 10%, probably we can live with that. I feel less happy about it right now, but let's start with how you're feeling about the trajectory of that conversation.
Look, we had the same instinct when they signed a deal with the United Kingdom. That was obviously an important step in terms of managing that trading relationship. Our trading relationship is different. We have these border and fentanyl tariffs, which in our view have been surpassed by the good work that Canada and the United States have done at the border. We talked about that extensively last week as well. So every country has a different relationship with the United States. Ours, in many ways, is amongst the most complex. We're their biggest customer, as you know. The trade is extensive. And their tariffs are punitive both to the Canadian economy, but also to the American economy. So those are the discussions, Amanda, that we're having with Secretary Lutnick, with officials from the U.S. Trade Representative's office, Ambassador Greer himself. Our position has been that all of these tariffs need to be removed. We're not looking to replace this tariff with a lower rate. We think that all of these tariffs are, in fact, as I said, not constructive to the economic prosperity of either country. And we were respecting, as were the Americans, until recent months, the free trade agreement that President Trump and his first administration negotiated. So our objective in all of these conversations, and we're clear about that publicly and privately, is to get to that point. But as you said, the American administration is complex. Sometimes they make decisions that surprise people. Our job is to just sort of hunker down and do the work. And I remain confident that we'll get to a much, much better place than we're in today, but it can't be quick enough because it should have been 2 months ago.
We just actually not too long ago heard from the new ambassador to Canada, the U.S. ambassador, who said that he thinks Canada will get the lowest tariffs. Now, it's not clear to me whether that means 10%, because that's going to be the lowest, or whether we'll even have lower than the UK. But he also mentioned July as a potential timeline. Does all of that ring true for you in terms of what you're hearing and people you're talking to?
Again, I've been encouraged by the comments of the American ambassador to Canada. I think he can play a constructive role. I'm looking forward to sitting down with him next week myself. I was going to this week, and then Secretary Lutnick organized a meeting that obviously I wanted to be at in Washington. So I certainly appreciate his counsel and his efforts. But again, we don't want to land at something less than 10%, Amanda. We want to get to zero. That's, as I say, we were firm and have been publicly and privately in terms of that objective, and we think that that's in the interest of the American economy and American consumers as well. But we still have to continue to make that argument. And the timeline again. Sure, July is better than August. June would be better than July. So our hope is to make significant progress as quickly as possible, but recognizing that it's a moving target. And the Americans say to us that they want to arrive at a big deal quickly. We think as there's a lot of good news that Canada has to tell in terms of our work at the border, fighting fentanyl, defense expenditures and investments that the Prime Minister spoke about in the election. If he said in the election that he wants a new economic and security partnership with the United States, obviously the security portion, our NATO commitments, potential participation in something like the Golden Dome Initiative, all of these things we think can form part of a frankly constructive and positive relationship with the Americans and will benefit the Canadian economy. So that's our hope, Amanda, is to move as quickly as possible, recognizing that every day that these tariffs and this uncertainty remains in place isn't good. And Canada was one of the countries that took the strongest response in terms of retaliatory tariffs. And we talked to them about that in meetings too, that those retaliatory tariffs remain in place. They're not beneficial to the American economy. So why don't we find a way to remove them as against one another and get back to respecting the free trade agreement?
That was something that's come up as some suggestion that Canada has reduced our retaliatory tariffs and that we could preemptively do that. What's your understanding of where we stand on what we'll keep in place until we reach some agreement?
Our objective is to leave in place the measures that we announced, both the initial $30 billion of retaliatory tariffs. You'll remember, I think, as far back as February, in response to the border and fentanyl tariffs. And then there were subsequent responses to the American steel and aluminum tariffs, which, again, are hurtful to our economy. We don't think benefiting the American economy in the way that they believe, but they have to see those numbers and see those results for themselves. And then there were the tariffs in response to the auto tariffs of the United States. So there's sort of been three tranches, and they'll remain in place for as long as it takes. Canada can show a lot of strategic patience. The Prime Minister uses that phrase. We have a strong economy, we have a strong government, a strong balance sheet, and we'll support Canadian businesses and workers through this. But every week that this is the case is less desirable than a week it's not. So, but the Americans, and we've been clear with them publicly and privately, Amanda, that our retaliatory tariffs were in response to the measures they took, and they'll remain in place for as long as it takes to return us to the position we were in before they started down this, we think, unfortunate road.
The other big file on your agenda, which is this kind of one Canada internal trade, this is I know that several ministers are focused on this. I'm curious for your thoughts about how optimistic you are. And I put that just in the context, sir, of, I was skeptical because I've been reporting on some of these barriers for years, and many of them are not tariff barriers, of course. They're human, regulatory. And no sooner had we begun talking about this, but we heard from the social workers of Nova Scotia saying we can't possibly accept the accreditation of the social workers of Alberta because it's totally different. And I thought, there you go. This is hard stuff, and it's provincial stuff. That's where it may land on your desk on that intergovernmental file. How do you see this unfolding?
So I think the premise of your question is good. Over time, and it goes back probably 7-8 years, my former colleague and my friend Navdeep Bains was the Minister of Industry when we signed sort of a free trade agreement in Canada. So it was in our first mandate after the 2015 election. That removed a number of the barriers to real free trade within Canadian provinces and territories, but it set out lists of exceptions or exemptions that provinces and territories or the Government of Canada could claim. So guess what? The list started to be populated with all of the examples that, well, some of the examples you just mentioned, some of it's around labor force mobility. But suddenly, the Government of Canada didn't come to the conversation initially with clean hands either, in the sense that whether it was food inspection, whether it was financial services, there were a series of national security exemptions, which are easy to invoke, but perhaps should ensure that there's considerable thought to make sure that we're not just adding to the list because we can add to the list. So there was a lot of work done 7-8 years ago. I'm encouraged, Amanda, by the work in the last few months. There really is a sense, because of the threat of American tariffs and what they can do, and because of work of public policy, people like you, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, bank presidents were talking to me about this. There has been a lot of work done, the Business Council, in terms of educating Canadians and policymakers on the benefit of having real free trade between provinces, including labor mobility, and the potential addition to Canada's GDP. You see anywhere from 3.5% to 3.9%. The Prime Minister, I thought, in the election campaign and in meetings with us, says it well, that we can give ourselves more than the Americans can take away. So the first thing we can give ourselves is one Canadian economy. But the details, the easy barriers, if you will, have been removed. So the first steps are the easiest ones. When you get into one of the premiers of a small province in my region in Atlantic Canada said in a meeting a few months ago, and he has been one of the real champions of this and has taken huge steps for his province and nationally. But the rubber hits the pavement when, in a procurement decision, a small government decides to give a contract to some fabricant, some maker of ambulances or whatever the government's buying from a neighboring province because it's cheaper. Well, you can imagine then the business owners and the workers at that company. So everybody has dozens of examples, but I'm encouraged, Amanda, by the real show of goodwill. Premier Ford has been a leader, Premier Houston, but all of the others in making huge progress. What the Prime Minister committed to doing, and that's what we can do on our side, is have legislation very quickly that will remove the existing federal barriers. They're small. We don't regulate the labor force and these sort of professions like social workers or technicians in hospitals. Those are properly provincial governments, but we have some barriers, remaining barriers that will be removed ourselves. And then you're right, we'll have to work with the provinces, but they're working with each other. And the bigger provinces, our Premier Legault has been, frankly, very constructive in this. So I'm encouraged, but I'm not naive. As you say, it's been talked about for a long time. A lot has been done, but as we get to the final steps, they will be politically and operationally amongst the most contentious.
And, you know, you've been in and around politics your entire life. I mean, literally your entire life, since birth. And
that sounds like a bad thing, doesn't it?
It can be.
You say that negatively, Amanda.
No. We're always glad that people are willing to serve. Those of us who grew up in close to public office often go the other way.
As you did.
as I did, but I'm delighted that other people don't get turned off. But you, like me, have seen this arc of the federal-provincial relationship. Your dad was Governor General, so you understand kind of the value of the strong federal role. And, the Council of the Federation is, to my mind, where it began in the 2000s of sort of provincial power and provincial rights. And it was kind of to me, it was a new era for this country that, maybe it was just a maturation, but it's alive and well. And that's one of the things I feel like you have to overcome to get the provinces to really see themselves as siblings rather than, heads of state coming together.
And you're right. I worry. I've been the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister for a number of years. And I've, at various times, our federation feels under more pressure than others. But you sort of took a trip down memory lane. Think about those times in the 1970s or 1980 when there was literally René Lévesque was running a referendum on breaking up the country. It wasn't, I was a young assistant in Mr. Chrétien's office in 1995 when there was, again, another referendum that frankly was a lot closer than the one 15 years earlier. So these are dramatic moments where literally the future of the country as we understand it was put to the test. Canada always survived. So I think we have to not be freaked out by the fact that there are at various times, for very legitimate reasons, regional tensions, regional pressures. But I'm there also, Amanda, quite optimistic. Mr. Carney's arrival, the focus on building big national economic projects, including in resource sectors, speak to some of the frustrations we heard from Western Canadian premiers. My conversations with Premier Moe and Premier Smith, frankly, have been very constructive. Premier Moe has been in closed-door meetings, like publicly, I think a very thoughtful leader on many of these issues. Our job is to work with the provincial governments that the citizens of those provinces elect. And Mr. Carney has brought a renewed focus to sort of, when he talks about one Canadian economy, sure, it's the interprovincial trade barriers, but it's also recognizing that there are some big projects, including in resource sectors, I say sectors plural, that are very much in the national interest and the national economic interest, and will make our country more competitive globally, will help respond to the threat, obviously, of the United States tariffs. So if we can work with business leaders, union leaders, and provincial and territorial leaders on big nation-building projects, and our election platform spoke of some big hydrogen projects, spoke of big mineral mining projects, a high-speed passenger rail development project from Quebec City to Windsor. Like, imagine what this means economically and for the citizens of the provinces. You know, the port of Prince Rupert. And look, I'm just naming examples, but the good news is there are many, and they will help build one truly national economy. And what I'm encouraged about, Amanda, is that premiers of many provinces and business leaders say to us, you know what, I think Project X, which may actually be in a neighboring province, or a province sort of, you look at a map, 2 or 3 over, think about it. Recognizing that upgrading some trade infrastructure will benefit many provinces. So we're not only focused on what is actually immediately in the geography of my particular province or territory. They're working together and with the Government of Canada. So I remain positive about that as well.
That's great to hear. There are a number of big, especially resource projects, and we have already heard a little bit of pushback, right? We've heard from Quebec on pipelines already. We hear from First Nations that are worried about, decisions being made that they say are lacking consultation. It's sort of some of the same friction that we've had over time that have kept some of these things from happening. But you're optimistic that this is a new dawn?
I am, and there are constitutional obligations around Indigenous consultations. All of those things, of course, still exist, and we can respect those obligations absolutely in the right way. But Mr. Carney was clear in the election campaign that developing, for example, energy corridors across the country, which can very well include pipeline infrastructure, conventional energy, understanding that the social license and the acceptability in different provinces is obviously part of the conversation. So it's sort of not a red light, green light thing as much as figuring out a way with a new economic reality driven by the United States and the desire to develop, as the Prime Minister said, trading relationships with reliable international partners. And just look across the Atlantic. There are a lot of them in Europe, for example. So how do we have the right infrastructure to ensure that those trading relationships can be enhanced, strengthened, amplified, expanded? I'm optimistic that the country is in a different mindset than perhaps it was 5 years ago. And you see that from business and political leaders right across the country that previously one might have thought would have been very resistant to expanding pipeline infrastructure are now saying, look, we need to look carefully at a way that can be done properly. So it's sort of half full instead of half empty as a conversation. But the Prime Minister grew up in Edmonton. He understands the economic reality of Western Canada, of the energy sector. But it's energy defined broadly as well. It includes obviously mineral projects. The Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario is something that we've been talking with Premier Ford about. Huge infrastructure opportunities there that can benefit Indigenous communities, parts of the northern part of Ontario that need those investments. So we're going to plug away at it, but with a real sense of urgency. And it's not just about saying, oh, we're going to compress this timeline. We actually want to get to the start of those projects. And a number of them, Amanda, I think people will be surprised how quickly we can move to get to the beginning of these projects with the goodwill that I see from business leaders and provincial and territorial leaders.
So that optimism is obviously going to be very welcome to many. The other piece of the equation, and on your desk, of course, U.S. trading relationship will be top of mind. We've talked a lot at the federal level and elsewhere about trying to diversify our relationships. And over time, Canada's been called a trading nation, but not necessarily a nation of traders. We haven't done well at encouraging our businesses to become exporters to anything but the U.S. Is anything different now, or will kind of the forces of the status quo work against us here?
So again, the premise of your question, I think, is bang on. 40 years ago, I think in Pierre Elliott Trudeau's government, the expression that somebody told me, they were talking about the third way, which would have been expanding trade with Europe. So sort of 40 years later, we're eternally overly dependent on the American market. And they have become, as Mr. Carney said, but Canadians and business leaders and workers see, unreliable. And therefore, the obligation on all of us, and it's not just government people, but it's business leaders, it's workers, is to figure out a way to reduce that dependency, recognizing, as you said, that we've said that for a long time as a country, but we've never before been in this level of uncertainty, and I would say punitive conduct from the American administration. So if it was true 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and everybody had examples then of, they're not respecting free trade in softwood lumber, and they haven't for a couple of decades. It's on and off and up and down as an example. But now it's much broader, it's much more menacing, They're talking about other sectors where there may be sectoral tariffs. So the hour is urgent. And I think the government of Canada, but the government of Canada, Amanda, I represent, I have a constituency in rural New Brunswick, coastal New Brunswick, two-thirds Francophone. There's a lot of entrepreneurs and business people, young people that came from northern New Brunswick, went to University of Moncton, have gone into business. The election campaign was hugely encouraging to me as I met and talked to all kinds of these entrepreneurs. But if you have 250 employees in a small industrial park on the outskirts of Shediac, New Brunswick, half an hour from Moncton, and 50% of your wood windows and doors are exported to New England, to high-end custom houses in Kennebunkport and Martha's Vineyard and universities. If you're redoing the windows at a Yale University residence, these are big contracts for a little business that they get in New Brunswick. And suddenly they're seeing, oh my God, like the tariff, the chill is real. And the workers there talk to me about it. The business owners, of course, do. So when I say to them, okay, well, if the government of Canada or an Export Development Canada, a COA, I'm just using a local example, but one that worries me as an MP, but there are hundreds and hundreds in communities right across the country, thousands. If the government of Canada said to the people at Westwood Industries in Scooduk, New Brunswick, okay, could you sell these wood windows and doors to European markets? The answer is yes. But to get dealers signed up, to go to trade shows in the Netherlands or in the UK, costs money, and they don't have the ability on their own to do that. They just don't have the cash flow or the balance sheet. And it was so easy to send them to the United States, and they've been successful at it. So there's all kinds of examples where we can suit up with them, help share the risk at first. But if you sign up more dealers around Germany, it's a big economy in Germany, and people may want these high-end Canadian wood windows and doors.
The U.S. has opened what I would consider another flank in the trade fight in Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill that passed, the spending bill. It includes some changes to tax treaty for treatment for Canadians that go back to the 40s. And this has to do with how our investments are taxed. And maybe the tax lawyers deal with this before we have to worry about it. But it seemed to me to be a real shot across the bow, because if this comes to pass, our CPP, which is 47% invested in the U.S., would suddenly have a 50% withholding tax, up from a very small rate. Now, individual investors the same, Canadian businesses the same. When you see that, what do you make of that when we're trying to actually get to a better place with them and they send this over, which is really devastating?
So we worry about some of these tax measures that the administration has spoken about. We're obviously following this particular piece of legislation as it makes its way through the U.S. legislative process. We don't want to prejudge what the Senate might do with it. We note that it passed Congress by a very, very small margin. As we speak, some senators are in Ottawa to sort of, on a goodwill mission, some senior senators to sort of say, you know what, we all don't have the same view on the economic relationship between Canada and the United States and the administration has. So we'll continue to advocate against these measures. And it has to be part of our conversation, and is part of our conversation with the administration, with President Trump's administration, with Secretary Lutnick and others, because sure, there are tariff measures, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, and then there are a series of other measures. In this case, worrisome tax measures that will affect Canada and other allies of the United States. Again, it's not in the economic interest of the United States to do this. To your point, I remember meeting executives from the CPP investment board. They talked to me about the kind of investments they made. They can be, frankly, transformational for a lot of big industries in the United States. So all of this stuff, we think in the end, will prove to be counterproductive to the American economic interest.
Before I let you go, I want to talk to you about sort of the tone of the last election the level of anger, I think you could say, on the part of some, and sort of a feeling, we may always say it's terrible and that it's worse today than it's ever been, and maybe we perennially say that, but it does feel like there's a level of divisiveness. This is a government that is in some ways new, but of course in some ways it's the same government. What's your message to, not in your riding where you get ridiculously large majorities, but your message to...
Don't jinx it, Amanda. Don't
Sorry,
jinx it.
so far. But to the Canadians who didn't vote for you or didn't want you back, and here you are, you're obviously working on behalf of all Canadians. How do you bring us together?
So I think it started on election night. I thought the Prime Minister's comments there, I hope, would have been reassuring, as you said, to Canadians that didn't vote for us. That's what a democracy is. Somebody wins an election and somebody doesn't. That shouldn't traumatize us either. I've won elections and lost elections as a party. Actually, I lost an election in my own riding almost 30 years ago. So this is a normal part of a democracy, but the Prime Minister did say, and his instructions to us as ministers have been clear. We were elected to be the government of every Canadian and every region of the country, and will be judged in the next election as to how we lived up to that promise. So if people were mad at us on the election day a month and a half ago, surely we need to understand that. We need to respect that, but also commit ourselves to making sure over the coming months and in the next election, whenever it happens, that they're not as mad as many of them were a month and a half ago. So, but I sat in the last Parliament, Amanda. There were people who were deliberately vandalizing the political climate. We shouldn't be afraid to say that either. I've watched Mr. Harper's government. I've seen Mr. Harper in opposition. I've seen Stockwell Day as an opposition leader. I've been around long enough. We have never seen the deliberate attempt to distort facts, to exaggerate things, to ascribe personal blame to political leaders for things that sort of no objective observer would think that these conclusions are reasonable.
An ongoing, unfortunate part of this conversation with people in public life is what you have to deal with, the level of personal attack, anger directed at you in a different way. Does it feel different to you? And for that, I would blame maybe our neighbors to the south, but really some of the tools, right? Social media and how it can be used and abused.
So you're right. I mean, I was talking about the last Parliament, but the
Yes.
broader issue, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of responsibility all over the place. I listened to my buddy Andrew Fury, Dr. Fury, when he participated in your podcast, speaking about that. There's an example. I mean, there's no nicer group of people than Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. But he had to have security because people would yell at his kids. He's got adorable young kids at hockey practice and stuff. So that level of sort of vitriol is new and is concerning. I'm lucky. In my own personal circumstance, it's extraordinarily rare that I don't read the stuff on social media. I never read the comments. And it's not because it's some great discipline on my part. Maybe I'm just too lazy. So I sort of putter around with my friends and my colleagues and do my job and don't get fussed about that. Mr. Chrétien used to tell us, Amanda, you don't need all the votes to win the election. You need one more than the person that comes second. So somebody's upset, fine. You try and understand that, but you continue to do the job you can do. I think Mr. Carney also, his arrival gives everyone a chance perhaps to reflect on, to your point, why there has been this increase. A lot of it is fueled from outside Canada. I think you're right. But there's a new prime minister with a new mandate, and perhaps we can collectively, all of us, start off at lower volume. Like if people decide to crank up the volume on the eve of some future election, that's whatever. They can explain that. But I don't know why you start with the volume always at 10 out of 10. Like it gets irritating. If your neighbor is blasting the music full blast all night, all the time, it's not constructive. So I'm hoping that everybody can turn down the volume, and that's Mr. Carney's style. And I've really, frankly, gotten to know and work with him over the last number of months in a way that I hadn't previously had. His style is sort of low volume, high impact, get the work done, focus on what we can do, what we can control, don't get completely bent out of shape about a bunch of things that are beyond our control. So if that is the way we're able to present the government of Canada in the next parliament, I hope that contributes. That alone won't fix it, but it should, I hope, contribute to trying to correct some of that, those circumstances that you just addressed or spoke about.
Really, before I let you go, President Trump has confirmed he's coming to the G7 in Alberta in June. Will that be a divisive thing, or is that an opportunity to actually make real headway on some of the things that are right top of mind in your inbox?
So hope, obviously, the latter. Hope that it's a positive sort of headway-making exercise. But the constructive relationship that I think we've started with Mr. Trump and his administration, I was there at the White House in the Oval Office, but for the hour and a half for the lunch in the Roosevelt Room afterwards, it was a cordial, constructive, productive conversation. And they're continuing at other levels, and I know the Prime Minister, the President are in touch as well. So, look, here's hoping that it's not, I saw in some reporting after the finance ministers, I think it was Madame Lagarde from the European Central Bank, who said you don't want a sort of G6 plus one. That would be exactly what we don't want or need. So to have European leaders say that, and that's certainly our view too, let's hope that Kananaskis can be it's a great part of our country, and I hope that people arrive there with the headspace to be constructive. I have no reason to think that's not the case, but we'll see what comes out the other side.
All right, we need to leave it there. So good to have you with us. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast.